did it, and I am so excited to share it with you. How often do you watch YouTube videos where they're criticizing someone else's work or critiquing it? Now on this channel, Truth First Christianity, separating the objective and factual from the subjective and traditional, we've provided 2 position papers, one of which you'll hear today, and we've made 2 bona fide discoveries, meaning no one else in the world has discovered these things. I cannot wait to share it with you. I've got hundreds of hours in on this project alone. If you don't even watch part 1 and part 2 of this, you'll be just fine watching part 3 of Jasher alone. Today, I'm proud to present a video to you about Jasher, the book of the righteous one, that you will not hear about anywhere else on social media. If you'd like to read the theological position paper about it, go to evangelistgarrett.com, scroll down the home page. You'll see a spot for these papers where you can click it and download your own copy. If you want to read it online, click the tab on the left for the drop-down menu, click on Theological Positions, and you can read it right online. Now, I've included the footnotes for today's video, so if you see a little thing coming up that says 1, footnotes, 2, footnotes, go in the video description and you will see them. Let's jump right into this fascinating topic. Jasher, the book of the righteous one, a theological landmine. Not quite Apocrypha. Jasher is Pseudepagripha. Or is it? Does the text mean anything at all to Christians? Its legitimate category is Midrashic Haggadah in Jewish religious tradition. In essence, it's a historical narrative. To understand why Jasher has not been formalized in Christianity, one really has to weigh several uncomfortable perspectives that our denominational and theological pre-commitments prevent us from doing. Are Jasher's contents even authentic? If so, is Jasher spiritually or supernaturally significant enough to be worthy of debate for inclusion in the canon of Scripture? Jasher is included among what, in modern parlance, gets referred to in aimless History Channel documentaries as lost books of the Bible. Are they really lost, though? Apparently not. Lost books seem to be books mentioned in Scripture, but that are no longer available to read. I'm going to pop a list of them on the screen for you right now. The exciting but often hollow buzzwords, lost books, don't mean that they're divinely inspired texts, though. It's not an accident that most of these books are referenced in the history portion of the Old Testament. The current arrangement of the Old Testament isn't the order in which the individual books were written or even canonized. Old Testament texts in the Holy Bible appear in the arrangement given them in the Greek Septuagint from the 200s BC, written in Egypt. There are 4 categories: the books of the law, history, poetry, and prophecy. References to history books in inspired texts likely fit the bill for Jasher too. Jasher's referenced in Joshua 10:13, where it documents in detail the sun stopping in the sky and refusing to set during the Battle of Jericho. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? The second mention of Jasher appears in 2 Samuel 1:18 and records a relatively insignificant detail when compared to the sun stopping in the sky by God's direct command. The reference in Samuel only verifies that King David had given Judah an official order to learn archery. The Israelites would certainly want to detail a major supernatural event. If Jasher is just a history book, it is telling that a supernatural event is recorded in its pages. That would be unheard of in our time. Yet the second reference is relatively insignificant. A minor detail about a monarchical edict giving military instructions. This does cause one to wonder about the veracity of Jasher as a concept separate from physical texts. Generally, medieval plagiarism would stick to ideas of doctrine and major supernatural events to pass to posterity. On first thought, one wonders why Jasher would be put forth as a verification for what is written in inspired texts in a way that seemed to verify them. Can an inspired text like Joshua or Samuel draw from a human history that does not hold divinity itself? Does that mean an ancient history book needs to be considered among a special group of books? It's a difficult question. As history would reveal, the answer is too difficult for even mainline denominations to answer. As a result of worldwide digitizing of records and texts, new readers have developed interests in these types of writings. Often they wonder how a book can accompany sacred texts throughout history and not be considered. So recently I explored such a question. That's what this series has been about. Should Jasher be considered Orthodox Christian canon? The provenance of Jasher's lineage copies really muddy the waters too. One text was known to have been written in the 1800s AD and passed off as Midrashic Haggadah to strictly Christian audiences. Another text of Jasher is known to have originated in Spain during the 13th century. That's the 1200s. The 13th century lineage copy was translated into English around the same time as the others during the late 18th and early 19th century. That's the late 1700s and early 1800s. But given the buzz around those copies, which were known to be forgery and plagiarism, the translation of the alleged authentic version wasn't released. In 1840, Mordecai Manuel Noah, a Jewish newspaper editor, purchased it and sat on it longer, unpublished, unreleased. In 1887, Noah sold the rights to his translation of Jasher to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Interesting. Yes, the Mormons purchased a questionably legitimate text to house in LDS Salt Lake City libraries along texts only decades old with their own divinity claims. Today, the LDS copy of Jasher is seemingly the only copy available for commercial purchase. Moreover, it's presented in modern publication without any indication that it's a Mormon book. One must begin reading the introduction and discover that the arguments they're making for Jasher's veracity are made supported by Doctrines and Covenants and the Book of Mormon. This fact alone means this book will never be touched by Catholics or any other Western Christian denomination. Look, I don't mean any harm, but it feels sinister that a well-organized institution, writing, criticizing, and storing up texts in Salt Lake City, Utah, and who are only tangentially Christian, would pass off their own century-old writing as inspired by God too. Is there a motive to purchase potentially legitimate texts like Jasher to house with them? Smart for them, potentially deceitful for Christians. Look, maybe LDS realized that with Protestantism and different fragments all over the world, that in the distant future, researchers may come to the view that LDS and their Salt Lake City home base, they might view it the same way as we view Catholic Vatican Rome today or the Council of Nicaea. As a consequence of simply housing documents, they could become the ancient Christianity of the future. To those who don't know any better, their hodgepodge of partially legitimate, questionable, and illegitimate texts may lose that moniker to researchers in the future unaware of what to look for or just too confused by the sheer volume of texts to make any of them make sense. And the rabbit hole goes deeper still. Many more reasons affect the ability of mainline denominations to take up the questions about Jasher. Catholics, for example, they've never opened closed canon scriptures for reconsideration. During the 382 AD Council of Rome, Jerome was charged with organizing the sacred texts into the Vetus Latina, better known as the Latin Vulgate. The Vulgate remained the Christian Bible with only minor language-to-language textual variants over the years. To accommodate books that appeared throughout time, to be worthy of consideration or that generated public interests, Catholics created a category called Deuterocanonical texts to include apocryphal books. Jasher would likely never be taken up in any serious dialogue about its potential placement in this category either. It would be wildly uncharacteristic of the Holy See to do this, and it would just create unnecessary controversy for the Catholic Church. I mean, think about it. Hypothetically, what could be gained by analyzing a Mormon-owned text of Jasher that would be worth opening the canon of Scripture to obtain? Great challenges are posed for Protestants, too, when evaluating Jasher, even though it's more readily discussed in Protestant circles. Even with their relatively new canon lineages, to question Jasher and suggest it may be either apocrypha or inspired would call into question the doctrines of inspiration, inerrancy, and infallibility. If those doctrines are susceptible to question, the Protestant Reformation is over. The net result of the whole Reformation has been an alternative authority to that of Catholic magisterium, and Scripture plus tradition, with special disdain for papal leadership, of course. Protestants instead identified Scripture as their authority. This fact requires doctrines that make their scriptures objective fact, you see. Hence, inspiration, inerrancy, and fallibility. The question posed by consideration of Jasher, if Holy Scripture is missing a book, basically, calls into dispute the very concepts of divine inspiration, error-free transmission, or God-breathed texts. On the question of accepting an ancient text into the canon of Scripture, there would be no disagreement among any sect of Christianity. Post-Reformation Protestants accepted the Vulgate too, after all, until Desiderius Erasmus's prolific work on the text of Scripture. His writing gave the Reformation a shot in the arm and their own documentary lineage of translation other than the Vulgate. And since Johannes Gutenberg's printing press had revolutionized reading and the availability of books during the same era, there was an explosion in the mass production of Holy Bibles and translation into other languages. A contemporary of Erasmus, Martin Luther, wrote a German translation of the Holy Scriptures from the Hebrew Tanakh. Later in 1563, the 39 Articles gave Anglicans and what would later be American Episcopalians their own rules of lineage for a canon of Scripture. Then the Westminster Confessions of Faith in 1647 adopted the same foundational canon for the Protestant denominations of confessional orientation in the West. These groups include like Methodists, Baptists, Presbyterians, Reformed churches. We think of Pilgrims or Puritans. A council in Jerusalem in 1692 even saw the Eastern Church adopt its own canon lineage, but they're out of the talk for now, the Eastern Church. So why is this even being talked about? How did Jasher come up? Quite frankly, cable TV and the ever-pervasive, ever-present temptation of Gnosticism, the idea that secret knowledge can still be discovered and it answers questions about God and our past. It's low-hanging fruit for scholars and lay people alike. For many, the fruit has always been too tempting to walk away from. But at the same time, what seems like a totally insignificant question really has the power to destroy a Christian church. Jasher cannot be included without other potential consequences. So Jasher's current category of Midrashic Haggadah, historical narrative, is where it stands. The question remains, however, is this the correct category? And if not, what is Jasher? Midrashic Haggadah might not be the right category. And here's where my discovery comes into play. I theorize and assert that Jasher, the Book of the Righteous One, was written sometime between 200 BC and 400 AD and is a bona fide sectarian Christian work, belonging to an early sect of Christians that practiced until about the 6th century AD. Today, this early sect of Christians is known broadly as Jewish Christians. Yes, Jewish Christians. In their earliest iteration, they were called Judaizers. Jewish Christians, or Judaizers in biblical terms, were known to have formed during the early days of the Christian faith, and they're documented in the Bible itself. The Jerusalem Council in the book of Acts documented a disagreement between the apostles and this sect of early Christians who remained Jewish while accepting Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Here's what many fail to consider, and this is huge. While the net result of the council found a Christian Orthodox idea born, the Judaizers went off on their own and thrived. They survived for centuries as Nazarene Jews. Often students of the Bible or church history fail to consider that when a heresy is weighed, rejected, and the prevailing party establishes orthodoxy, the rejected party, though sometimes they remain in fellowship, retain their heretical ideas too. And they continue to practice them together. It seems that most assume reconciliation during the councils when history teaches the opposite almost every single time. Some sects of Judaizers have resurfaced today around the world and with both Christian and Jewish lineage. Variants of their beliefs are espoused in part by groups such as the Black Hebrew Israelites and the Hebrew Roots movement, the latter of which end up returning to the Torah through Christianity somehow and adhering to the Mosaic law, mixed customs, and Old Testament feast days. So in conclusion, Jasher is a piece of literature from the early church period that resided with Christians of the time and whose lineage stems from the first schism at the Jerusalem Council. Today, their text is owned in the flesh by a new claimant of the Christian title, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, originating in the 19th century, the 1800s, Mormons began a strictly American movement that demonstrated what many call questionable principles, literal heresies, early church misinterpretations that stem from not having read doctrinal arguments from universally agreed upon church councils to their completion. They also espouse their own prophet and their own alleged sacred texts. While they have aimed to incorporate more gospel rhetoric in recent decades and long to be viewed in the Christian denominational patchwork as just one of the boys, what they have is at least Midrashic Haggadah, and at most, an early version of Old Testament scriptures used by Christian Judaizers. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can support us, please do. If this type of work isn't worthy of support, I don't know what is. This is the kind of work you can expect. 100 hours on a project, new discoveries, legitimate discoveries that answer very mysterious questions with objective facts. On my website, Jasher represents the second complete theological position paper we've produced. Both are in line with our longtime mission of Truth First Christianity, separating the objective and factual from the subjective and traditional for the benefit of our faith. You'll see what I mean when you read them. There is no one right side. Tell the truth about these things in spite of what side gets offended. Now, on another note, this is the second discovery this channel has made. I did a video on the Seventh Crusade where I discovered, contrary to the prevailing view of scholars, that the intended target of the Crusaders was Damietta, Egypt. I found that it was actually Alexandria, Egypt. A storm blew them off course, and they ended up in Damietta. It's fascinating. I'll put a link to it. You can support me on PayPal. It's in the video description. It's very easy, very quick. We also have Venmo and Cash App. My books are available at amazon.com/author/Nicholas Garrett. We also have shirts, mugs, masks, gimmicky stuff. I'm working on 2 new cool design ideas. 1, a shirt that says, "May your work today bear fruit," and 2, a mask that says, "Cover your faces, sinner." If that doesn't match today, I don't know what does. So this coming week across the platforms, on TikTok, I'm doing a little series called Wisdom from My Father, and they're just little 15-second vignettes of his humor. Tomorrow on Instagram, today is Wednesday, tomorrow, Thursday on Instagram, I'm going to be sharing what Sunday night's video premiere is going to be about. I'm at Evangelist Nick G and Evangelist Nick Garrett across the platforms. And finally on Facebook, I'm going to be sharing this very position paper about Jasher with some prominent Christian pages for debate. God bless you. Thank you for being here, and may your work today bear fruit. Thanks. Liberty, I sing.